Now you can hear me. All right. Um, Thank you. Okay, so starting over from the beginning, I had a long explanation of what I was doing here, what my plans were. But unfortunately, the sound was not working because I had the wrong audio input device selected. Um, so I see that I'm dropping a lot of frames as well. That is not good. That is a problem. How is it looking in terms of the video? It's okay. Okay, so we're not dropping a catastrophic amount of frames here. All right. So from the top, um, my name's Kyle Thompson. I am a doctoral candidate in the Anticiplay project, and I am here to discuss my research and kind of do some research on error. My research is into utopian processes in games, and that means that there's kind of two dimensions to it. One is about utopia, which is in Ruth Levitas's terms, the desire for a better world. And um, this desire is something that is quite broad. It's quite expansive. It's something qualitatively different from small improvements like you know um, having a slightly better graphics card. Um, and just a second. Is the stream okay? Okay. Okay. Yes. Just checking the audio. Yes. So it's this desire for a better world, something that's qualitatively different, qualitatively better in a meaningful way, um, and it connects into our hopes, our deep desires, and something that is quite expansive, unconditional. It's something that we connect into in these kinds of collective moments of aspiration. And it's something that is expressed often in art. Typically, it's associated with the color blue, but we see it both in the visual presentation of art, but also in the activity of art as well. And that brings us to the processes side of things. Now, the processes side of things comes from philosophy. It comes from process philosophy. And what process philosophy does is looks at the entire world and everything in it as a process instead of looking at it as entities, um, things that exist independently and consistently, kind of regardless of their environment until they don't exist somehow. Um, Now, the way of thinking about the world in terms of things is something that is quite common sense, even though if you think about it long enough, it starts to become very strange and hard to imagine how it would ever possibly work. But when I think about, say, my computer mouse, um, I think about it as kind of the same thing across time. I don't think about how it changes over time very much. I don't think about how it is an activity in itself that is existing in the world. I just think about it being a practical thing that I can use, and it's pretty much going to be that way until it breaks. Um, but if I think about it in terms of process philosophy, I think about this as an activity. This mouse is mousing over time. It's existing in an active sense, and the little changes that happen to it over time, like say, my um, my hand, putting oils on it or dirt on it or whatever, um, and changing it in that way is much easier to understand if I think about it as and processes made up into this bundle here. Um, my hand is interfering with the mouse, and they're both processes coexisting with each other. So it's much easier to think about change from a process ontology point of view. And typically, we would think about utopias as what are called developments in process philosophy. That is to say that they change structurally over time, and they're developing into something, right? They're not existing like this mouse, more or less the same across time as kind of a basic activity, but they're changing and developing into something new, like a plant. And so, uh, yes, utopian processes tend to be developments. Um, they grow into something, and they spawn new processes off of themselves. So that's kind of the philosophical background that I'm bringing to this project. So you take this utopian side of things and you take the process side of things, you put them together, you get utopian processes. And of course, I'm looking at games. So, how to study utopian processes in games? Well, one thing I could do is to simply play some games and report on them. Right? I could study them in that way. But what we decided to do was actually to do something a little bit more social scientific and study people's reflections on games. So either videos, podcasts, um, articles that are reflecting on people's play experiences. So I am studying how people report their experience of games that I have decided contain utopian content, based on either my play experience or on my understanding of the general reception of the game. Um, so doing that means taking these reports, these various types of reports, and coding them with a relevant code, doing a content analysis, as it's called, um, of what is said. So I can learn something about, well, when people talk about utopian processes in games, what sorts of things do they tend to talk about? So here we can see my coding scheme in the program NVivo, which is a social sciences research package, or software program that allows you to take documents and code them for different points. So given that everything in my philosophical perspective uh, is a process, the highest code is, of course, process. And then all of these are children of process. There's nothing outside of being a process. These are all processes. And within this process code, we have two further families of codes. So let's see if I can make this a little bit larger for everybody. There it is. Okay, so we have everything under process is a process, so it's all the codes. And then the relationality code and the affect code are two codes that contain children of their own. So we'll go over the top level first, and then we'll talk about these subfamilies. So the first one is control. Now, control is something that anyone that has ever read a video game review will be very familiar with. Essentially, it is often described as the player's interface with the game, right? So if you have a controller and you're pressing buttons and things are happening on the screen, the controls, so to speak, are often how well does your avatar in the game, does your character in the game respond when you press a button? Uh, when you want to jump over a pit, uh, does it feel intuitive and rewarding the way that the character moves? Um, that is a type of control that's typically spoken of in video games. Now, that isn't the only way that I'm describing control here. What I mean by control is something that comes from cybernetics. It's a broader meaning of control, and it has to do essentially with um, regulation of a system. So it could be a control structure, right? So, for example, if you are playing a visual novel where you have characters on the screen, you have text on the screen, and the player's interface is typically to press the forward button or up and down to select options in the dialogue, um, then the control structure is largely about how the game uh, decides when to show what text, what images, the control flow structure to get through the story, and how the player interacts with that. So designing that game design is really about control design, in that kind of like how do things fit together sense. So it's about all of the different actors that you have in this game space, this play space, and how they fit together. So I think I have a little description here. Do I? Oh, no, it must have been in a different file, unfortunately. So I will, fortunately, not be able to refer to that. But I did have a working description to use there, what I meant by control. Um, Anyway, so if you think about, well, there's an irony. One of my friends is now playing the game Control, uh, which, yeah, I mean, Control is often thought of as a kind of like seizing, like when your dog is going the wrong way and you have the leash and you're pulling on them, and that leash is your control mechanism. That's often the way we think about control. But if you think about it cybernetically, you're thinking more about like, okay, what does the human want? What does the dog want? And how is this system fitting together to create a positive relationship for the two of them? That's what you're trying to design for, in terms of control. And it's something you see often in game design as well. Like, for instance, if you are designing AI to play against a player, um, your design intention as a designer is not about um, making the most controlling AI possible that will anticipate the player's every action and simply destroy them, unless you're designing something like Watson for Jeopardy or whatever. Um, you're typically designing a system that is going to promote a positive experience for the player in terms of providing challenge, and some kind of convincing facsimile of what a human would do, but is not going to make the game unfun by utterly destroying them. So that kind of balancing act, that design act, is an act of designing control where both the AI and the player are interacting in a positive way. So the next one is problems. So problems typically come up in the coding as either things that the player encountered that frustrated them, that were unsatisfactory to them in playing, or they could be uh, um, diegetic problems, right? They could be problems that are within the game scenario. So if we were thinking about Zootopia, um, then there's problems in terms of like some people being ostracized from society. There's problems in terms of, say, what is it? The mayor's assistant scheming to get political power and corruption being in the background of the political system there. Those are problems that exist diegetically. Whereas if, you were a person who is hard of hearing, but Disney did not include subtitles in the movie when you downloaded it or watched it off the disc, um, and you weren't able to understand what was happening. That would be a problem for you as the reader, or sorry, the watcher. But in either case, they are both being coded as problems, because what we're interested in here is not simply the diegetic content of the games, but the utopian processes that they represent that exist, outside of game narratives and actually, in the player's interaction in the real world. Um, then we have progress. Progress is something that's often associated with Utopia. So this is essentially that development side of thing, right? Is there a development either in terms of the player progressing through the game space, or diegetically in the story, right? Or maybe it could be about the developer adding patches to the game to make it better. That could also be a form of progress. But wherever we see progress, then that's what we're going to encode for there. Exploration is something that I ended up adding kind of midstream in my coding, because it was something that came up very, very frequently in coding for the Outer Wilds. Um, and that game involves a lot of exploration, and that exploration is accompanied by sort of a utopian tone of hope, aspiration, um, flourishing, and kind of the desires of the people that are at the center of the story. And it can also be exploration of like learning new game mechanics, that kind of stuff. Technology is something that I think is commonly included in utopias, as a feature of what makes them utopian. It's not always the case, but oftentimes it is the case in like science fiction. Um, and so I included it here. And of course, it's important to games because video games especially, but also some of the non-video games I'm covering, um, make use of technological means to do things that simply wouldn't be possible otherwise. I mean, that's very characteristic of art in general. Disaster. Disaster is obviously not something that's utopian, but it's something that we often see showing up in utopian stories as a kind of backdrop to what's happening. Oftentimes, the people in the utopia are coping with disasters or recovering from disasters. This was especially really important when I was coding Kentucky Route Zero. It's in the background all the time there. Meditation. So this is about either the player meditating on their game experience, or having a reflective moment in the context of their broader reflection. Like, how did I feel about this? How did this how did I approach this? Or it could be diegetic in terms of the character reflecting, or it could also be the control structure of the game encouraging meditation on the part of the player. Solution. So if there are problems, there are often solutions. Not always, but oftentimes there are. And of course, having solutions to problems is part of a utopian process. If you're moving towards something better, you are overcoming obstacles, and that requires there to be solutions. So solutioning happening in the world is an important thing. Motion. This is one that has to do either with a kind of figurative motion or just like literal motion in the gameplay space. It's one that I'm not entirely sure I will keep, but I put it in there because in some games, the freedom of motion or the motion of the world has that kind of utopian character of moving towards something better, of like being liberated in motion. And so I thought it was important to include when I was coding Outer Wilds. Action is something that I am coding for in terms of like a very strong sense of action, either there being a moment of um, time sensitive activity that the player has to engage in the game, or a very urgent sense of action in the game's story. Um, it's not something that's come up a ton, but I could see it maybe being important to utopias in that sense of like, now I'm in utopian time, now I'm in the time to act, and I can do it, and I can manifest what I want in the world through action. Then we have the category of relationality. So this contains three different things. So the first one is ecology, and this is really referring to any time that the reflection is describing entities existing in the world and interacting with other entities. So it's not simply ecology in the sense of like the natural world, the study of the natural world. It's an ecology of things. So if a specific character or organization is mentioned, that would be ecology. If there is a description of like uh, the conflict between two mechanics, that could maybe be ecology. It's a very, very broad category that just sort of captures that overall sense of the way the world fits together. Community is something that is describing either a diegetic community in the world. Like community is something that's often associated with utopia. This idea of like a community that is redeemed, that exists in a positive state that is imagined, um, or the community that is striving towards a utopia. That's also one that comes up quite often. Uh, but it can also refer to the community of game players, or it could refer to the community of like games journalists or art critics, uh, and how they interact with each other. So if somebody is thinking, is reflecting, and is talking about, well, I had to uh, I had to experience the game in this way because I was concerned about how my readers would interpret it or how other journalists would interpret it. That would be like a community thing. Dialogue is either dialogue between characters in the game, but it can also be dialogue between, say, the writer and the audience, or it could be dialogue in terms of players interacting with each other. And then finally, we have affects. So these are the affects based on sort of going through like an emotion wheel that I thought most specifically described the things that I was seeing in these reflections. So affect is basically just like emotion that is um, observable in the world. It's not something that you feel personally. It's something that you can see out there in the world. Something that is a little bit more objective than subjective. So when I'm coding these documents, I'm essentially looking at the affective dimension. What kinds of affects do I see in the text? So the first one is enthrallment, and that would kind of be your enthusiasm for the game or your engagement with the conversation you're having in reflection, or that just that sense of like, oh, like I'm really into this is enthrallment. And typically, um, this is the main concern of games journalism is to talk about enthrallment. Is there enthrallment or is there not enthrallment? Is this game addictive? Do you get into it? Is it fun? Uh, like these kinds of things are associated with enthrallment. Um, but I find it interesting that enthrallment is so important also to the discussion of utopia. My colleague, Karine, you may have heard or read talking about interaction rituals and that sense of entrainment in interaction rituals, of being being into it, uh, is really something we'd associate with enthrallment. So yeah, you don't really have the conception of a utopia without that deep enthrallment into, imagining it. Desperation is that sense of kind of not necessarily hopelessness, but being on the back foot, right? Being in a really tough place, having a really hard time with your current situation. So, oftentimes the utopian process could be moving from a state of desperation to one of, hope and enthrallment as like thriving, right? Um, and you can you see this in, like, for example, in Kentucky Route Zero. This came up a lot. Like, you're dealing with a lot of desperate people who are dealing with poverty, who are really suffering, who are having a hard time. Um, and so I coded in desperation, but we see it, in many different scenarios. I've had some articles that I coded for that sort of related the author's experience of desperation, going through depression or poverty or whatever, to the game they were playing, and how that either helped them out of that state or reflected how they felt. Hope is something that's super important to Utopia, of course, because where we have that aspiration for a better world, we have hope. Um, and we see it show up either in terms of characters hoping in the story, or people expressing hope about games becoming better, about the art medium moving into a more utopian mode. um, Melancholy is kind of that state of being somewhat positive, somewhat negative, right? That sense of, yes, I have I have happiness. I'm feeling happy in a way, but it's also tinged with unhappiness, or reflecting on things that were good but were lost, or things that you never had but that you lost, opportunities you lost. That can be melancholy, right? Um, Often shows up in uh, just the contrast between individual states of being or organization states of being, situation states of being. Um, you see melancholy show up. And, feeling your distance from utopia is often, but like still having some sense of like that hope, that positivity that's there, and just feeling how far away it is from the way you're living right now is often where we see like melancholy show up. And then last of all, we have frustration. Frustration it could be frustration with game mechanics, like, oh, like I want the character to do a thing, but then they won't do the thing. The controls are bad or whatever, right? That's a type of frustration. But it can also be frustration in terms of like this story doesn't doesn't really reflect what I want in my utopia or my vision of a better world. And I'm still having to play through this, but it feels like the game is never listening to me and my point of view is never being included. That can be a kind of frustration. Um, so when it's very strongly evident, um, any of those kinds of situations, that's when I would code for frustration. And that brings me to talking about the game that I'm going to be coding for today, which is Twilight Mirage. It is a actual play series in the podcast Friends at the Table that was put together from a number of different tabletop role-playing games. Some of which the authors or sort of the podcasters created themselves, and some of which were taken from other players. So there was The Veil by Fraser Simons, and there was also Scum and Villainy is another game by well, Strosh and John. uh, yeah, Strosh Asimovic and John LaBouffe Little are the two authors of that game. So yeah, those were the two main games they played, but they also included a number of other smaller games in the process of their season. So, what I want to emphasize here is that the people that I'm going to be coding for are the players of the game, but they are also, in a way, the designers of the game. They didn't design all the games they played, but they did design sort of the control structure of the season, the way these games fit together into the kind of story that they were playing and also writing at the same time. So people might see that more of a process of like, oh, they're producing a radio drama. But if you actually listen to an actual play podcast, you'll see that, of course, the play process is really influential on the direction the story takes. And this is an account of players describing their play process. In the same way that, like, for example, if you play Skyrim with mods that you have included in the game, or Caves of Cud with mods that you've included in the game, that doesn't make you any less of a game player. All right, so we are looking at the Twilight Mirage postmortem transcript here. I haven't done any coding on it yet, so I'm just getting started. And this is it. Oh, wait, is that? No, no, no. No, 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 no. This is it. This is it. Here, yes, that's the one. Okay, so this is the so right here I had the YouTube auto-generated transcript, um, just from their, like, whenever there's a video put up on YouTube, the machine will translate it into text, will transcribe it. However, the Twilight Mirage season has recently been entirely transcribed by hand by human beings, um, as part of sort of the Friends of the Table initiative to make sure that there are transcriptions available for all their seasons, to make it more accessible to their audience. Yes. So, thank you very much to the transcription project for doing this transcription, because it makes my job a lot easier as a researcher to have something that's actually formatted so I know exactly who is speaking at any given time, and not just you know, a massive dump of text with no clear distinctions between who is speaking when, what exactly is being said, or what just the machine thinks is being said. Um, all of those problems are gone. Yes. So I have 15 minutes left, so we're going to sit down and we're going to do some coding. All right, so the first thing to do here is to show the coding, so I know how far I've gotten. And I'll talk a little bit about my methodology here. So first of all, this stuff about the content warning, or this front matter, I'm not coding that. Anything that is about like the introduction to the to this recap session, I'm not really coding that, because um, it's simply not connected to the reflection dimension. It's just the business of doing the podcast. So all this about like, oh, this is who I am, this is who I am, etc., etc. I'm not including that. So yeah, let's talk about Twilight Mirage. Does that sound good to everyone? That's a good place to start. So it doesn't sound like it has any particular relevance to my codes. All right, so Austin says, I felt like maybe we should start at the very, very end because we had a number of questions, including this one from Nat about the final sequence. So Nat says, how did the ending sequence come to be? Like, it's amazing, and I cried whenever I listened to it, which I have like 3 times. But how did it happen? I love this show so much. Y'all are such beautiful and wonderful people. Okay, so right here, I would say it's amazing, and I cried whenever I listened to it, which I have like 3 times. But how did it happen? So I think this first section here, I'm going to go in and I'm going to code that in terms of affect. Well, I think there's definitely some enthrallment going there. And also, I would say some melancholy, because they're crying. It's kind of maybe a happy and sad sort of crying at the same time. And we'll also say maybe progress, because this is about the ending. And I don't think any of these would come up. Yes, so I think these are the good ones here, and I'm going to go back and actually code this one, and I'm going to talk about progress there, and I'm going to talk about the ending sequence as an object, right? The ecology there, and maybe the exploration dimension. How did it come to be? How did it come to be? Actually, it's probably, yeah, I think that's fair. Okay, cool. I love this show so much. Y'all are such beautiful and wonderful people. I'm just going to quote that as I'm going to code that as community, right? Because this is about y'all. This is about the members of the podcast, possibly the community as well, that of listeners. And I'm also going to code that in terms of enthrallment because it's expressing enthusiasm, right? All right. So Austin says, "Thank you so much, Nat." I promise this is the only time we've ever, I'll include a big compliment like that, but it's like, okay, thank you. I mean it from my heart. I'd say, like, Jack, Keith, and Ellie, do you want to speak a bit to this, to the kind of finale sequence? So I will code this part here, and I'm going to put in, we're going to put in, let's see, dialogue, community, control, because this is about deciding whether or not to include the um, comment in the recap section. And I will put um, meditation, because this is a reflection on the process of composing the um, reflection podcast, the postmortem, and the it's clearly affected. But what? How would I code this? I don't know. I mean, I think it's enthrallment in this conversation is what I would say there. So I'm going to code those in there. And then this is just, business. Not going to do it. Yeah. So Ellie says, yeah. I mean, I guess I can start, but it was kind of mostly y'all who worked on it. It started from the Futura Free song, obviously. So that was one of the songs that they used in their intro. And so I'm going to say here that this is about community, it's about progress, and it's about exploration, and it's maybe about technology here. And no clear affect dimension there. Austin says, right. We were like, this is such a good idea and we should use it for something. And this was the best version of that. And then was it Keith, or a combination of Keith and Austin, who came up with the question specifically. So I'm just going to code this part here. So this is a good idea. So I'm going to put some enthrallment there. We should use it for something, and maybe put some hope. And because they're aspiring to create something new and exciting. Control, because they're making decisions. Progress. And then we're going to talk about the ecology and the community and dialogue, because it's deciding what to do in dialogue, and then also the community is the producers of the show, right? And finally, exploration again, and meditation, because they were thinking about it and deliberating. Okay. So, all Keith, 100% Keith. I pitched it to Keith, and I was like, can you come up with 5 questions for people? And Keith came up with 11? 15? 15, okay. I came up with 15 and then lost all of them because my computer shut off. And they're laughing. I forgot about that. And then I had to rewrite them. Right. I got like 10 of the original 15, and I had to write another 2 or something. Yes, yeah. And yeah, as Ali says, Futura Free is a song. The Frank Ocean song was like the huge inspiration for it. There was, I shared this in the Discord, but there was a night when I was walking around in my neighborhood listening to that song, and I immediately rushed. It was that song, and also a podcast that gave me another different intro idea, which I'm not going to spoil here. But I rushed to our production chat and was like, we need to do an ending like this. But I actually didn't conceive of it as being the end of the season until a little bit later. And then, yeah, I was like, I trust Keith knows who Gig Cavart is way better than I do. Keith can come up with good gig cap art questions. This is the question. This is the character that Keith played in the season, who is a journalist and who is asking questions to the characters at the end of the season as like a kind of wrap up deal. Um, and we did. Then I guess Jack, we so recorded for like 90 minutes total, I think, right? Yeah. So okay, so this is like super um, enthrallment, um, meditation, progress, um, dialogue, community, ecology. The influence of Frank Ocean. Um, Solution. I would say like, oh yeah, this is it. This is the one. Um, Technology, talking about using online communications. Um, and control in terms of like saying, okay, I trust Keith to do this. This is Keith's process. I think that's good. Let's code that. And I think this part here, I'm just going to code this in terms of like control and progress. Control and progress. Control and progress. Came up with them. I lost all of them because my computer shut down. So that'd be control, frustration, progress, problems, technology. So nothing there. I had to rewrite them. Progress, problems, uh, uh, maybe action, frustration, and this part I'm just going to say progress, problems, meditation, trying to figure it out, solution, technology, maybe not technology, buh, 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 and frustration, and I'm gonna say this. Oh yeah, this one. I'm gonna change that to, or I'm going to include additionally disaster because losing all your work is a disaster. Okay, so should give you an idea of what my process looks like. Unfortunately, I'm out of time now, so I've given this huge preamble to what I'm doing here. What the conceptual framework is, what my methodology is, and now you've seen a little bit of what the actual work looks like. So, yeah, hopefully that is a useful background for the next time I do this, and I'm just going through coding. So, yep, nobody in the chat today, I think. What? Oh, 5 people? Oh my god, my phone didn't show me any of that. So, okay, well, that's tragic. I'm so sorry, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, I will read the chat log going back. And next time, hopefully, I can find a better way to do chat because using my phone to monitor chat has been terrible. And I really, really need a second screen to monitor chat. So I'll figure that out. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for following along. And I promise next time I'll be more interactive with the chat because I just couldn't see what you were saying, unfortunately. So yeah, thank you for sticking with me, and hopefully we'll have another one of these next week. Yes. All right. That's it for today. Goodbye.